My top 5 books that I had read in 2025 video got significantly more traffic than I expected. And when I think of it, maybe people thought that I was saying those books were all published in 2025 and not my favorites for what I had read in the year. But I think it's more likely that people just like capstones. Seeing as I did post my top 5 for 2025 a bit before the year ran out, I figured what I could do to provide some variety is do a top 10 books of all time. But what I'm actually going to do is a top 11 because we're hardcore. So we're going to do my favorite 11 books. And I have to say that there are things that I'm leaving out here. It's an arbitrary number 1. 10 books. Okay, you've got 10 fingers and 10 toes. Does 10 books really amount to anything? I'd be much more interested in somebody recommending a trilogy. You can read a trilogy sometimes even in a weekend. You've got Friday night, Saturday during the day, and Sunday. So the original idea of 10 is itself just going to be flawed. I've got some stuff in here that I think would make many people's top 100. It has. But there's some stuff that wouldn't. And I've got a variety of genres. If that sounds cool to you, then I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. So, rather than do things in a true top 10 style, what I'm basically going to do is jump around countries. And this stack of books here takes place from many different places. So what I'm going to do is, rather than give you a true 1 to 11 list, I'm going to jump around regions and genres. My first book is actually a cookbook after a style. So the first book is The Art of Fermentation by Sandor Katz. I am a fermenter, or I was for several years. I started before COVID and had actually just started making bread around the time that COVID happened and bread became a very big thing for people to make sourdough bread. I've brewed and molded and rotted several different things, and all sorts of different vegetarian cuisines, different ways of preparing dairy, and so on. So this is my nerdy, foodie kind of book. This can teach you all sorts of really cool survival skills also. What people don't often realize is fermentation is a way of preparing food for safe consumption. And there are numerous weeds, just wild vegetation in the US and other countries that can be prepared for food. Fermentation can aid in that. The other thing is that once you realize the principles of fermentation, you can ferment pretty much anything. You don't really need a lot of recipes. And once you know how to make alcohol, you know how to make it out of just about anything. So this does discuss beer brewing some, and I think some other liquor, but it's not really the focus of the book. The whole book is it's just an encyclopedia of different fermentation techniques and different fermented food. Every book here is an S, so I'm not going to belabor the point by saying this is an S. What I will say is that I imagine this is a bit different than the book that you expect recommended from my literary channel, if you've seen the books that I've recommended. But this is a phenomenal how-to book. You can learn a lot about cooking if you find conventional methods of cooking kind of boring. This will give you something fun to do. There is stuff in here about bread, but he also makes recommendations for other books. It's not really his focus. His focus is really, this is what fermentation is. There are not extensive recipes, but if you see here, you'll see this book is almost like a history book or something like that. And that's really the best way to look at it. Most of the pages in the book are presented as blocks of text. There really are not many recipes. This is about technique and learning a new skill, not learning how to cook dinner one night, but it's like learning how to bake for the first time or something like that. Sandor Katz, The Art of Fermentation, is a best book of all time, according to me. The next books I'm going to do are theory. And the first one of those theory books I'm going to mention is La Technique et le Temps. That's by Bernard Stiegler. This book is available in English. It's been wildly influential. The crux of the book is a deconstruction of the difference between a person and a tool. So if you know how to use a wrench, and I understand using a wrench is conventionally easy, but there are all sorts of techniques and new ways of looking at something that a seasoned handyman or construction worker or something like that would know about that tool. What Bernard Stiegler essentially argues is that much the way that using that tool is a skill set, so is a language. And much the way that I would say that my name is Mark and English and French are a part of me, using that skill is a part of the person using the tool. And in that sense, that tool is essentially a part of the person. He discusses this with tools in general. You can see how, in a broader sense, everybody from a person using a horse and a plow to plow a field in 1850 is using specific skills and competences that would say that plow is a part of him, just as somebody using modern farm equipment would say that that technology is a part of them. And so even if you're to say that different people in different regions farm differently, you can say that there's a language of techniques that they have, and those things are specific to them. So you've got little pockets and groups of effectively cultures. That's the main argument of the first part of the book. A lot of the following two parts really look at how we interact with technology in specific. But once you've got the main framework down in a piece of theory like this, things kind of fall into place. So I understand that my going through that one idea may not be the single most fascinating thing you've ever heard. And it might not be as full as me giving the rundown of a novel and a synopsis. What I would hope would happen from this presentation, because I'm not really equipped to present philosophy, is that that idea would sound interesting to you. I don't know if the name Paul B. Preciado, aside from my videos, means anything, but it's very obvious that Paul B. Preciado and Akhil Membe are familiar with Stiegler and have likely read this book. He died recently, so if you're interested in contemporary French theory, as in what's actually contemporary, say since 1990, since 2000, Stiegler's a good place to look. This book was published in '94. I believe he wrote most of it while he was in prison. He was in prison for armed robbery. So I probably should have led with that. If you're interested in prison literature, this isn't technically a piece of prison literature. But Bernard Stiegler had a very hectic upbringing. And according to Wikipedia, he managed a jazz bar and was a left-wing activist and a number of various activities in his life. But one thing that he did do was he went to prison for armed robbery. I believe he robbed a liquor store and was caught. Yeah, he's somewhat Derridian. He writes much more clearly than I think a lot of people would expect from a certain French philosophy. That's not shared and universal across his books. I read La Disparition recently, and he uses a turgid vocabulary in that book. But if you're interested in contemporary French theory or French theory in general, this is one of the reasons why I learned French, to read books like this. The second piece of French theory that I'm going to talk about is La Société du Spectacle, SOTS, the Society of Spectacle, of the Spectacle. And this is my copy of his collected writings. I haven't read this yet. The Situationists in general, the original ones, were just very interesting. Based on my searches for what PhD programs offer, and books that are read by PhD students, SOTS frequently makes syllabi. I thought that was interesting. I read SOTS when I was working on my tech degree. And this is a very left-wing book, but the principles around what's the difference between a situation and a spectacle, who has the authority to make the spectacle or determine what is a situation, and ideas of that nature, what celebrity meant, and so forth. I mean, they became common parlance on the internet. Society of the Spectacle is a pretty short book. It's written in these very short chapters. I heard somewhere that extremely short chapters like that are called crots, but I don't know if it's true or not. Yeah, I love this book. I don't know how to really talk about it at length without trying to contact a professor of some sort and say, how do I make a presentation video for complicated theory? That said, you're probably not interested in me rambling for 10 minutes on the book. It's a left-wing philosophy book that basically asks the question, what is spectacle and what is situation? And a spectacle is something that we see on television. And how is spectacle used? So why are we watching TV? Are we at work? There are workplaces where you have TVs playing. If you're watching the spectacle on television, what is your situation? Well, let's say you're working at a nail salon and there's a TV in the corner for the people who are having the work done on their fingers so they can watch if they don't want to talk. And I mean, you're at work. And this is a very real question, I think, with a lot of just politics in general in the past at least 12 years or so, but like probably more like the past 20 or 30, really since people like McLuhan were writing. It was even interesting then. Guy Debord was a bit of a cult figure. He had his diehard adherents. He ended his life too soon. He ended it. Yeah. I don't have anything else to say about this book. I encourage you to read it. You can find copies online in English. It's very available. Society of the Spectacle. The next book that I'm going to talk about, the next genre, is poetry and missives, memoranda, memoir. I had a few different poets that I could have chosen from. And this is the way we're going to be for a lot of authors. If I had to choose a poet, choosing between Baudelaire, Rimbaud, and Apollinaire is essentially impossible for me. I know Mallarmé and Verlaine slightly less, so I'd be more willing to choose Rimbaud or Baudelaire or Apollinaire above them. But me choosing Rimbaud is really just about the letters included in this book. This is a complete work of Rimbaud, and Rimbaud stopped writing when he was like 18. So I don't remember. I know there are people who are bigger Rimbaud fans than I am who would know specifically when he stopped. But I can't offer that. What is unique about the Bibliothèque de la Pléiade book is that it includes extensive correspondence from Rimbaud. And his life, after he stopped being a poet, was such that it reads like an adventure novel from the turn of the century. He has his gay affair with Verlaine. Verlaine winds up in prison. Rimbaud explores Europe briefly, goes to Turkey, Cyprus, winds up all over different places in Africa. He becomes a coffee salesman. He and a friend get a wild hare up their asses, and they decide to sell arms to the king of, I think it's Ethiopia, I can't remember. All of that aside, that's just letters. You know, we all know this story roughly if we're familiar with Rimbaud, but when you actually read it in his own words, granted the end of almost every letter ends with a request for money. What's going on there, though, and what's happening in his life is absolutely fascinating. And if the story sounds interesting when you're reading the poetry, and the poetry doesn't have anything to do with the story. Like, that's the big thing. Like, none of the poetry has anything to do with what happened after the poetry. Descriptions of his life afterwards sound totally different. He was interested in geology, and he was a coffee salesman. But if you get a collection of Rimbaud, make sure it's one that has letters, because they're fascinating. The actual poetry, which was the point of where I was trying to land that digression, is phenomenal in French. When you read it in French, it's a bit like reading something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for the first time. You're kind of just blown away by the coherence of the item in such a young mind. And the voice is spectacular. And that's lost in English translations, which is unfortunate. When I first read Rimbaud, I read him in college. I read essentially a complete poetry. I didn't have access to the letters. I thought he was interesting, but I didn't quite understand what the big deal is. Now I read A Season in Hell, and I'm blown away by the voice. I'm not upset by the callbacks to his earlier poetry in that work, but Rimbaud is kind of peak French poetry, and I recommend basically everybody read Rimbaud. If you can, read a collection with his letters. The next book we're going to look at is a different genre. That genre is the short story. And when you're talking about the short story, in contemporary lexicon. The American short story really is kind of unique. People complain about MFA programs. I would have liked to have gone to one when I was in school, but I didn't. And our MFA programs and our appetite for short fiction, which is in part fueled by the MFA programs, is unique. When I was trying to learn French for the first time, I looked for short stories and short story collections, and I found it very difficult to find the extensive list of writers I have in the U.S. who write short fiction. So I'm the rare bird who will say I don't see a problem with MFAs. I would have liked to have studied one, but I did not. But further, I like short fiction. I think it deserves its own audience, and I think it's somewhat ridiculous to write it off. The short story exists for its own sake. People enjoy creating them. The writer I'm going to talk about is Grace Paley. And if you look on Wikipedia, which is really the extent of the biography I have of her, she was a Jewish woman. I believe she was living in New York. She was left-wing. She wrote some poetry also. I haven't read it. I've only read the short stories. These are great short stories. Grace Paley is like one of my top, well, obviously, she's my only short story writer in this list. I would have liked to have included William Trevor and Anton Chekhov, but I can't include the whole world with 11 authors. But Grace Paley is phenomenal. We get a lot of stories in here that are kind of a working class woman living in New York, questions about faith, questions about what it means to be a woman. That might sound a little goofy, what it means to be a woman. Why am I a man telling you to read a story about what it means to be a woman? But when you read these things in masterful hands, a question of a woman questioning what it means to be a woman societally, in masterful hands, it becomes a story of identity. So what I'm really saying, if I say, oh, this is a great piece of feminist writing, what I'm actually saying is like, this is a person who is examining themselves existentially. And it all makes it into the short stories. She's got a great sense of humor. Her writing has kind of a zip. It's sort of John Cheever-y, if you know John Cheever, but it's definitely different. I don't have specific stories after saying that she tends to write about being a woman that I want to share. There's nothing that immediately comes to mind, except that the overall collection is phenomenal. Not all of her stories are about women. There are definitely stories about boys, young men, boys growing into young men. There's one story, I think the story is two male friends, and it starts when they're like 12 or something, and by the end of the story they're both pursuing careers and such. I don't know what else to say. Do yourself a favor. If you speak English, if you're from the United States, if you want to read something about like what it means to be American, and read the collected stories of Grace Paley. So we've moved through the first 5 books, and we are now at novels, which is going to be the crux of this video. We're going to go by place again, and I'm going to start in French. The French novel that I've included in my list for 11 favorite books of all time is Voyage au bord de la nuit. I don't know if you can see that. I love this book. You can see the little sailor on it. This is my French copy of the book. I got this used. I've had to tape it together. It's been bent and curled before I got it. And reading it, I had to make sure I didn't accidentally remove pages. When they get old like this, that can happen easily. But But I love this book because it was very clearly read in French. I've got French notation in the margins, and the book has been worn out. I do have the book in English. My original copy of the book, I believe I left with a friend who I no longer speak to, but around the time of college. I read this book in college, and I love Celine. For a long time, I used his character names as names of video game personalities on the internet. So, Voyage au bout de la nuit is the story of Bartholomew and Robinson. And Robinson is a soldier. The book starts out in World War One. They're in France and all this other stuff. Bartholomew goes from France to Africa. He leaves the military. Then he travels in the U.S. After traveling in the U.S., he returns to Europe. I believe he encounters this friend that he made in the military, Robinson, after Robinson Crusoe. He finds him, and he's kind of out on his luck. Murder is a joke to Celine. The book, at the end of the book, revolves around a plot to kill someone for money. And it's completely handled as a joke. And you don't judge the characters reading the book the way the book is written. The English copy of the book, for some reason, when I read it, it reminded me a bit of Dostoevsky. That might be the conservative politics, but I think it has to do with the way that the English just reads. The word choices and so forth, and what it means to translate a text. It's impossible to translate Celine the same way it's impossible to translate James Joyce. There's slang in this book that I don't think can be readily transferred. The beginning of the book kind of feels like Joseph Conrad, which was a feeling I didn't get at all with the English copy. And then the second half of the book, which really is distinct from the first, has this kind of almost theater of the absurd quality to it. And kind of a grittier city life type vibe. I can't recommend that you read the book in French if you don't speak French. That's honestly not me bragging. It's just that the book, it really is Joyce. It's like, this is the closest that the French produced at that time to Joyce. The Proust was much better known, of course. Celine wasn't unknown though at all. He made a fool of himself. He was not a nice person, but yeah, you've got Proust, who's a much more robust paragraphs, these lavish phrases, and more Jamesian. And then you've got a more kind of slangy, jazzy kind of voice, and that's what you get in Voyage au bout de la nuit. It's a shame that Celine was who he was, because I think a lot of people would probably be much happier to say that they're big Celine fans. I hesitate to talk about him on YouTube because he was such a rotten person. There's a book I haven't actually read it yet, but this is Celine the Crippled Giant by Milton Hindus. And Milton Hindus, I've read the introduction to the book, and I've read about Milton Hindus, and not just on Wikipedia. So I have some experience with where the book is coming from. But my understanding is he kind of makes the argument that maybe we should forget Celine. And a lot of French writers who work in the tradition of Celine have a really funny thing that they do. Rather than talk about Celine, what they tend to talk about is Charles Bukowski. And these are people who are much better novelists than Charles Bukowski ever was. But yeah, Celine was a rabid anti-Semite and racist. If you read the three famous pamphlets, you'll see that he thought racism was actually a good thing. Like, that's explicit in the text. Like, he outright says that. And it's completely insane. And you wonder where the massive talent that wrote Voyage à Bord de Nuit went, that wrote those pamphlets. And it's not just that, I guess the best way to say it is, it seems like the pamphlets were written for money. It seems like he probably wrote them all very quickly. They're not one coherent story. There are three very different length works, but it is a few hundred pages in total. So it's not like it's nothing. He was a vile person, but the guy who wrote Voyage à Bord de Nuit, I mean, I wish that I knew Celine if he was Bartholomew. Of course, Bartholomew's friends with the guy who's planning murder, and he's not a very good person either. But this is a book that would probably mostly appeal to young men. If you speak French, the French of Celine, I'm reading Julia Kristeva, what I'm actually reading right now. And she's got a great essay on Celine in Le Pouvoir d'Or. But other than her, I don't know of many women who have commented on Celine. I think Joy Williams has mentioned him in short stories. But I would probably be more willing to recommend this book to young men. I don't... He's a man from World War One. He is not behaving or writing for a more feminine audience. If you want something gruff and gritty, it's to be found in Celine. The French is absolutely beautiful. Voyage à Bord de Nuit, or Journey to the End of the Night. Okay, so I've got 3 countries left. And those 3 countries are Peru, Egypt, and the good old US of A. So I guess what we'll do is US of A. We're going to do this chronologically. It keeps me from having to make decisions about what should go first and not. I'm going to say Henry James' Wings of a Dove. It's been a while since I've read this, honestly. I was working nights, I think, when I read this. But this is essentially a love triangle story between a wealthy woman, a man who doesn't have any money, and another wealthy woman who is dying and has money. And essentially what the book is it's about the scheme between the healthy woman and the man she wants to marry, scheming to ingratiate the man into the life of the dying woman, and to get them married so that when the dying woman dies, the man is left wealthy, and after he's wealthy, he can marry the healthy woman who is wealthy. At that time in history, I'm sure it is the same today, but maybe not talked about quite as much publicly. a good marriage would require that both people were wealthy. You wouldn't want somebody who is poor and somebody who's wealthy. The writing is phenomenal. I don't frequently run into those famous Jamesian sentences that don't seem to mean anything. I will admit that his appositives, his false starts, can be a bit difficult. That said, the text is always just so remarkably clear when you're reading it. You get such vivid images. And, yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say. The Wings of the Dove is phenomenal, and it's in my top 11 list of my favorite books of all time. The next two American novels that I'm going to talk about were both written in the 70s, or at least published in the 70s. The first of those is Saul Bellows' Humboldt's Gift. This is a story about a writer who's kind of down on his luck. And it's ultimately a novel of friendship. His close friend dies, and the story is about basically this gift. The gift that Humboldt leaves the narrator is a screen treatment. It's effectively an outline for a movie that he would have liked to have made. Treatments are basically outlines of films. I don't know exactly their role in the film industry, but this will give you an idea of what a treatment looks like. But I don't know if they're ever brought the producers to say, like, this is what we want to do. Are you approving this? Are you going to fund this? Or if that's more of a script thing. I know what they are used for by writers. As I said, treatments are effectively outlines. This book is great. I don't have a huge amount to say about it. I do want to caution that I think the main character like smacks his girlfriend or something, or his wife at one point. If that's a trigger for you and it bothers you, Saul Bellow was he was abusive from what it sounds like. But yeah, Saul Bellow is, in my opinion, a great writer, probably more in line with Celine. But yeah, Humboldt's Gift is a phenomenal novel. The last of the American novels that we're going to talk about in this top 11 books of all time. That's such a bold claim. I really wish I didn't have to make a claim like that. My list of 11 best novels is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I love this novel. I think it has certain Pynchonian elements that I don't want to start talking about to spoil the book completely. There's a conspiracy, though. But what it shows when Toni Morrison does that is almost greater than this book. I've read every novel that Toni Morrison wrote. So this is unique. She does not write these kind of like postmodern stories. And there's a guy with magic who's flying and this conspiracy. She can do it all. I understand that Beloved has some, magic elements, but it's not really done the same way as it is in Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon really does have that kind of humorous element to it. It really does have a Pynchonian vibe because of the conspiracy. So it's not just the magic. It's just that the range she has is completely unbelievable. And my favorite book, because it seems to speak to me most, as a man is Song of Solomon. I don't agree that Song of Solomon probably for certain audiences is not her best book, but again, she has such great range. If I'm going to recommend people Toni Morrison novels, one that I love to recommend is Sula because it's so short. And you can easily get people to read Sula because it's like 100 pages. It's not a complicated book. It's every bit as good or better than anything Zora Neale Hurston wrote. And that's where I really think Toni Morrison is coming from. The trilogy of Beloved, Jazz, and Paradise is kind of the end of her great period. Her earlier works are better, but in general, those last books, Love is probably the worst. And then I would say A Mercy, God Help the Child, and then Home, I think. You know, it's really difficult. Home more speaks to me as a man, but God Help the Child was certainly not a bad book. Regardless, what we're talking about is, yeah, Sula. I would recommend Sula. Song of Solomon is where we are. Read it, man. I don't know what else to say. Just go out and buy this book and read it. And don't get caught up on the stupid pictures you see of celebrities reading Beloved who look ridiculous. And don't get caught up that Beloved is taught to high schoolers and Sula is taught to middle schoolers. I mean, you could technically teach most Henry James probably at elementary schoolers. He's clean enough, you know. He's a Puritan. Just go out and read Song of Solomon. My next book that I'm including in my top 11 books of all time is Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter by Mario Vargas Llosa. Now, he wrote this one when he was a bit younger. If all you heard about this book was the story and not the style, you would probably wonder why I'm including this on my list. The story is effectively the story of Mario Vargas Llosa courting his aunt, and they wind up in a relationship. Now, the style, aside from the auto-fictional element, is what makes the book, and the book is a comedy. This book had me laughing at a few times pretty loudly. Basically, there is this ridiculous, short, funny screenwriter who writes these soap operas. And interspersed, you've got a chapter that is the story of Mario's character. I forget if his name is Mario in the book. It's been quite a while since I've read this. It looks like Mario is the name in the book. But you've got a chapter about Mario growing up, wanting to write maybe, and whatever, and he meets, you know, or not meets, but he talks to his aunt. Each alternate chapter is a chapter of Pedro Camacho, and his stories are basically they're like Southern Gothic. They completely go off the wall. In the book, he has a mental decline and effectively goes crazy. And the stories that he's telling in every other chapter start to be completely ridiculous. And I'm including this work because I think it's probably one of the funniest novels I've ever read. It's probably like this and Don Quixote are in the same sentence like that. In my opinion, this was much funnier than White Noise. And White Noise I thought was hilarious. Maybe not much funnier, but it was a better book. So if you're gonna read Mario Vargas Llosa, uh, be adventurous and read Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter instead of Feast of the Goat. The final novel that I'm going to include here is a book I read in college. And I read the Cairo trilogy in Arabic lit class. The book is the Cairo trilogy. I would describe this work as Tolstoyan. And effectively, it is three chapters. It's three novels. The Cairo trilogy. It's tracking the growth of a family. And the first book, it's through the narrative of it tends to focus on the youngest boy in the family. He's got two older brothers. The first novel is more about the mother, and it's very Proustian. By the end of the trilogy, we're getting more direct talk about Kamal, the young boy who is now a man. I'm not sure what else to say about the book. It's like a 1,300 page book, and I've got 12. Yeah, it's at least 1,300 pages. I don't recommend huge books to many people. I guess that's not entirely true with the Gaddis and the William T. Volman recommendation. If you're interested in Egypt or the Arab world at all, this is a huge book. It was very famous in that region when it was published. Numerous movies were made out of Naguib Mahfouz's novels. The style, all things considered, is pretty phenomenal, especially because of his output. Probably there's some stuff that's not as refined and toned down as Proust and heavily edited. But Naguib Mahfouz was a figure kind of like Balzac. He wrote innumerable novels. And the Cairo trilogy is really about the transition of a more traditionalist style of life in Egypt to a more modern world. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about the book. It deals with love. There's family stuff. There's hypocrisy, just rank religious hypocrisy. The book is funny. It will have you crying when political murders happen. There's martyrdom, or they call it martyrdom. You know, there's a question of whether or not it should be called that. There's the introduction of Western literature, the great philosophers, Descartes and Spinoza, into a young man's mind, and what happens when somebody experiences these things for the first time. There is so much in this book. There's political history. You will learn about Egyptian history through this book, and I know that because when I studied this book, it was effectively a major part of like kind of what I was doing in school, and I studied the Middle East some, and I don't know a whole lot about that region, but I made a point to try to educate myself and learn about it. And this book, it feels very Western. I recommended Sanaa Ibrahim 2 videos ago, I think it is. And there are times when he feels out of touch with the West. You know? Naguib Mahfouz very much feels to be aware of Europe and the U.S. and other countries in a way that is more approachable and friendly. But, yeah, I can't recommend this enough. Alright guys, so I've made this video. I do hope that these authors are interesting to you. I know the video is a bit long. I don't expect everybody ever to check every book, but you know, if any of this is interesting at all, yeah, I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. Otherwise, several books out.